So thanks everyone for joining. My name is Wagner. I'll be on the panelists today. This is Rodolfo, our MC. I'm just going to do the introduction and then throw the ball for him. So he's going to have to handle it. Hopefully you can. And then good luck. Software Crafters is a community of people built upon the Software Craftsmanship Manifesto, which was signed by a lot of authors that also participate in the, to build the Agile Manifesto, and was built after that. And yeah, we strive for not just working software, but well-crafted software and all the things around it that make good software and, crafted, I guess. Usually our sessions are not one-way talks like most of meetups. Usually it's with the participation of the audience. We usually do fishbowl, and we might do that after the break as a pivot of the format tonight. In the beginning now, we're gonna do the running open source projects topic that was decided in the previous meetup. We always decide in the beginning, and Rodolfo is gonna, after I finish the introduction, he's going to facilitate that. We've got here Armin, we've got Michael, and myself. We're going to talk about our open source projects and answer your questions. We are being hosted by the great Nick from Lexicon, now in Endava, right? So if you want to just say a few things about Lexicon, that would be much appreciated.
Yep. All right. Hello, everybody. So thinking about it now, I'm probably not the best person to talk because I'm not a developer. So double Danery in this crowd anywhere. All right, Max Nash, get on up here, please. This man used to be a recruiter, so he's definitely more equipped for this job. Sorry.
What am I saying? Oh, shit, okay. Wagner, what am I saying?
Oh no, just talk about Lexicon and what does Lexicon do. And...
Yeah, sweet. Hey guys, I'm Max. I work for Lexicon. I'm a junior software engineer. Lexicon we're basically like a digital transformation specialist consulting firm, so we partner with typically larger enterprise scale businesses, guide them through what being agile actually is versus what they maybe think being agile is. Typically taking that from more legacy software, so like older versions of Java is a common one that we transform into fresher JVMs like Java 11 onwards or Kotlin services. We do a lot of React stuff. Michael, one of our speakers, actually used to work for Lexicon, was a very big proprietor of both Kotlin and Java for us over the years, so appreciate you, Michael. That's basically it. I've been with Lexicon for 2 years. I was a recruiter before that, so obviously I went to GA. There's a good few amount of General Assembly grads in the crowd today, so yeah, that's it really. And we used to work with Wagner when he was over at IAG. One of our big clients is IAG, so Wagner. That's how we all kind of met each other.
All right, thanks. Thank you very much. Give it to introduction. Give it to you.
Just before we start, if you want to know more about the group and if you have any feedback about the event, we have a GitHub page. You just Google Software Crafters Sydney GitHub. You're gonna find that. In our GitHub, you can find the Slack link as well, if you prefer to communicate via Slack. And the third way is just go to the meetup.com, send us an email if you have any feedback, or just talk to us. We are here. So the way that we're going to be running, like the different parts, so the first one, we're going to be deciding what's going to be the next topic. So we're going to be spending like around 10-15 minutes doing that. We're going to be using Slido, so please QR code. So please grab your phone and point to the QR code. Using the same Slido for defining the topic, and then after the folks they come here and start talking about the open source. You folks can use Slido to send like questions and vote on the questions, and the most voted are the ones that we're going to be discussing. First part, defining the topic for the next event, and then we bring the guys here. Then we're going to have a quick break, and then we come back. So for the second part, we're going to do a little bit different way. We won't be using Slido, so if you want to discuss anything, or if you have any questions, just come here. I can explain a little bit more later how we're going to be running that. And then at the end of the event, we're going to do a retro, a quick one. So just like things that went well or things that we can improve. If for some reason you need to leave before that, just leave your feedback in the board, right?
Yeah, I'll get the board closer.
You can leave some
post-its
here,
post
just
and
the
feedback.
feedback, and then this way we know how we can improve for the next sessions. All right. So
what we're gonna do now? People are gonna choose the Panellists right on the left.
Yeah. So
The next topic for the next meetup.
yeah. So did it work? Like I'm able to access the slide? Cool. So we already have these ones here, but feel free to add like new ones, like anything that you want to hear about, like or to share if you want to share anything in the next project. I'm gonna be adding those ones in slide. Let's do it now. You can type as a question first.
Aquela cadeira ali. Estão todos aí? Tem uma dúvida? Vou fazer embaixo.
And feel free to vote. There's a thumbs up. You can vote, and then the most voted one is the one that we're going to be doing next time. CICD. The menu design and soft skills. Okay, see some questions already. That's good.
Are we limited to the ideas there, or can we?
No, you can write your own idea. Anything. Related to software. Do folks need more time? We're good. Still thinking, voting. Okay, so far CICD is the first one. Then Microsoft's patterns. Okay, so last minute to vote. Offs, more rappers, that's good. Showing high quality collaboration, nice. Stay here. Oh, there's a running open source project.
Great concern.
Testing fundamental TDD, it's good.
Down. It's already 4. It's 4. This is an interesting topic. You should be on.
Also, I guess we have a winner. So CI/CD. How to really do it? It's gonna be the next one. So if you know about CI/CD and want to be here next time, so please let us know. If you know someone as well.
Sorry, Rodolfo, I'm going to give you this microphone.
Cool.
Lachlan's leaving.
Can you just,
Hello, testing.
can you all hear at the back?
Yep. Hey, hey. You hear me? One, two, three. Can you hear me? Yeah, all good?
Perfect.
Alright, so CI/CD is the winner. And again, like if you want to be here or if you know someone that really likes CI/CD and is really keen to share their knowledge, please let us know. We're gonna do our best to have folks to speak about this subject next time. Now? I guess we can start with the open source. So tonight we have Michael, Armin, and Fagner. These guys, Armin. The microphone. I'll reach. Okay, cool.
Okay, speak louder, maybe.
Yes. Cool. So, like as we talk here, feel free to add questions in Slido. I'm gonna be using the most voted ones. So as you folks start writing questions, I just want you guys to start talking about yourself, like what is the project that you run. Just like a quick intro, just to set the scenario for the next questions. Do you want to go first?
Sure.
Hello everyone, my name is Michael Paper. I used to work here at Lexicon not so long ago, and as Max used to tell everybody that came through the doors, I am the author and maintainer of the React hooks testing library. So if you're working in React and you're writing hooks and you want to test them, that is what my library does.
Perfect. Oh, that's okay. I'm Armin from representing Thanks Dev. I've got my brother here as well, who's been working on Thanks Dev. He's one of the early starters of the project. Basically, our job is to connect open source maintainers with companies. The way that we do it is we analyze companies' code bases and their dependency tree, and we let them know who are the open source maintainers that they depend on. That's the simple elevator pitch.
I'm Fagner. I created a JavaScript cookie library, which is a library to manage cookies in the browser. It doesn't work server side. It was originally from jQuery, and then there was spin-off, and on the version 2 I removed the jQuery dependency. And since then, there's been version 3, etc. And if you are handling cookies in the browser, you're probably using JavaScript cookie library, or you're doing document.cookie yourself, which means that it might not work in all browsers. But anyway, that's what we do. We make it work in all browsers, and there's a very simple API of cat set, etc. That's what I do.
Cool. Guys. Well, so my first question, I just want to understand, like, how did you guys start the open source, and what was the main reason, like the motivation to start your projects, and what were the challenges that you faced when starting?
That's right.
So did you?
No, you can go back. That's fine. Yeah.
So yeah, I started in 2010 when the project was handled by Klaus. He is a German developer that used to work on jQuery UI tabs. jQuery was a big thing at the time, in around 2010, and you can imagine, not so much now. But and then eventually started contributing to JavaScript Cookie because I was using the company that I was working on at the time. And eventually, he put me as a contributor on his own, project that is in his own username on GitHub. And after some time, I started, having issues. I participated in the conversations, and then we ended up being a pair working this project. And at some point, as jQuery was becoming more and more not so relevant, and JavaScript was still ubiquitous, I threw up the idea of taking jQuery out of dependency, just use pure JavaScript, so people could use with any framework or library that they wanted to. And that's what we did in version 2. And yeah, since then I haven't been extremely involved in that project because it's the kind of project that after you do it, it's finished, and there hasn't been a significant amount of changes in its API. So basically, I started with using that on my company, one of the first engineering companies I worked, and then I started contributing, and it became like a side job, I would say a side project.
Do you want to know how I got into open source or this project?
Both.
All right. Well, so two very different stories. So for open source, I was working at a company many years ago. I think it was around 2015. And there was a tech lead at the company. I was just a mid-level developer at the time. And he was very passionate about open source and was looking around the company for anything that we could possibly open source. He really wanted to start that initiative at the company. And I had a little library that I was working on at the time, this library that was, it was a Redux library called Redux Subspace. I won't go into what it does, but it fit the bill. It didn't have any company secrets in it or anything that was too sensitive, and he decided that we were going to open source it. And so he went through all the legal and did all that kind of stuff, and we went out there, we put on GitHub, and I got thrown in as the maintainer of it, and I've been maintaining open source ever since. This library, our actual testing library, again, I kind of lucked my way into it in many ways. There was a big conference, a React conference, where they demoed the hooks for the first time, and they released it on an alpha build. And I played around with it that weekend, and the first thing I thought when I saw hooks was, this is great. I could test these without having to worry about the DOM, without having to worry with components. And the first thing that happened as soon as I wrote my JUnit test, my Jest test, was it crashed. The first thing, if you try and run a hook outside of a React component, it doesn't work. It throws an error. And so I started working on it and tried to figure out how could I write a test just for that function. And so I sat there for about 2 hours on a weekend, knocked it out. And at the time I was doing a bit of open source already, so I just chucked it up on GitHub and forgot all about it. Then about 5 months later, they released it for real. Hooks were released in the actual latest version of React, and suddenly I'm getting downloads like crazy. It's going through the roof. Issues are coming in, and people were using it, and I didn't really know what to do.
because it was just very, very Googleable, you know, React hooks testing library. That's what they wanted, and it came up as the number one result. And then about 2 months later, React testing library, the component version, reached out to me, and they wanted to link in their docs to my library as the one to use if you wanted to test hooks. And then they brought me into the testing library, org on GitHub, and then you can see the usage chart just go through the roof after that. And yeah, the rest is history.
Nice. So for me, my background was I didn't even know I was working in open source. I started playing with Arduino, just tinkering stuff and just playing around, leaving issues on SparkFun and Adafruit when things weren't working. And then later on, as I was talking to my brother, he explained to me that you're actually publishing libraries and you're doing this, you're just copying, pasting commands, and he was very patient with me and explained the ropes. His background is software engineer. My background was enterprise IT. So I was just trying to get LED displays to work for Nestle and Shiseido kiosks, point of sale concepts. So that was how I got introduced to the ecosystem. But as I mentioned, when I was working in enterprise IT, I was doing a lot of contract negotiations with companies like Salesforce, with AWS, and the whole time we're doing these things around due diligence and value creation for companies, knowing that the giants like Microsoft, Adobe, and everybody else is actually depending on open source maintainers like most of the people here. So that's when, speaking with Ali, we understood that there's a huge gap between what is happening in terms of the value creation between the open source maintainers and the value extraction being the companies, whether it's the Adobes or the Microsofts of this world. And that's where we started working more and more with the open source maintainers like Alec and understanding their story. So for me, I've done a little bit of tinkering, but it's also getting to know the community has actually been one of the most rewarding endeavors ever. Yeah.
Good. I'm gonna grab a question from Slido. This one's from Michael. You created and worked on support for React hooks testing library. My question for you, do you still like React? Or has it become more HR?
I do still quite like React. I think some of the things that they've done in the latest version, React 18, and what they've been doing with server components, I think is really complicating React. I think it's a very different React to learn than it was when I learned it first. I would hate to learn React today without having the years and lessons learned over. If I was to build a UI today, I'd probably still use React.
Question here. This one is for everyone. What would be the one advice you would give to people who want to contribute to open source software to actually get started in a meaningful way?
Just do it. Like, it's a lot scarier to start than it should be. It's actually not so bad once you get going with it. But just find a project that you use. I think your experience there is quite good. Find something that you use and get into their issues and look at see if there's anything that you could work on and try. Most maintainers will love you forever if you actually just comment and say, I want to do this, help me do this. They'll give you all the support you need.
So they will love you because it's it's unpaid work, right, in a sense. And the reason why I did that is because my company was needing some features, and then I helped them with help Klaus to build those features that I wanted. And then I realized that people were, really interested in that, and it was helping other people. And then it's more about that sense of, helping other people with something than, just, getting paid to do the job. And of course, there are the non-payable benefits, right? Like, for example, I learned about SEO. So when I built JavaScript cookie, it was intentional actually to use that name because people search for JavaScript cookie, they find it. So it's mostly organic search, and then you get some. Yeah, I mean, you get software that's being used by a lot of people, and that kind of gives you some credibility, even though it doesn't really matter because I mean, it can be a great dev and have no open source, and I've met most of the great devs they haven't been doing open source, but it does give you some credibility of participating and building something that other people use and finding useful. So yeah, as you say, just do it, and that's how you start. And you can open source anything, and if you want to hook yourself into something that is already widespread, go for it. Start look at issues and build some code, create some pull requests, get some feedback, and if you haven't been coding for a while, you might even get some experience to introduce you to the industry. So there's only benefits there than just doing your own project by yourself without interacting with anyone, right? You get a lot of skills and a lot of experience with that. And so yeah, that's what I would say.
I guess for me, talking to a lot of maintainers, the one piece of advice I'd give is embrace imperfection, right? A lot of open source maintainers are creators. You could argue the point that they actually are artists, right? And a lot of engineers take pride in their work and they overanalyze things, right? But often, if you put it out, if you ship it, that's when you start to get real feedback. You can be very self-critical, and I've worked with a lot of maintainers where they're just like, I need to do this, I need to fix this, give me 6 more months before I ship it. Just ship it, right? The sooner you get people testing it, the sooner people start giving you feedback, that's when the rewards actually kick into place. And that's when it gets addictive, because all of a sudden you've got 5 people telling you they love your product, right? And that's when you start building momentum. So to embrace imperfection, that's what I'd say.
Just one thing on that, Matt. The reality now is that a lot of people are doing it, and so it's like there's a lot of projects out there. So everybody's doing it, right? So it's very hard to. There's a limited number of people in working with open source that want to contribute, and there's a lot of projects out there. So it's most likely that you're gonna build something on GitHub, put it there, and nobody's gonna notice, right? It's more likely that's gonna happen. Still, just making it open breaks a psychological barrier that's just insane, because I mean, nobody's gonna see it, right? But you put it there, and just the fact that you're doing it creates to yourself it's a great challenge, right? It's not easy, and if you can get criticism, right, and that's you're in a very good state, because people are talking about you. Right, and I mean, share it on Reddit, share it on Hacker News, find some communities on Reddit in which you can share your projects, and on Hacker News also, maybe you get something viral, and maybe you get more feedback, and then everything I do is for learning, right? And I think that if you optimize for that, that's where you get most of the value out of it, right? So, yeah.
I'll probably also just add, don't try and make something that is going to be the next big thing, or try and be the next viral library that everyone uses. Create something that's useful to you or to your company, or that you are using already. And I think generally I've had more success that way. If it's useful to me, it's likely useful to other people, rather than trying to find something to fill a hole that doesn't exist.
Thanks, guys. I have a question. So you mentioned that like a lot of folks start using the hooks test library, and you saw the issues tab in GitHub just increasing the numbers, and like maybe I talk my experience that when I use a open source, usually I just go there and ask for other folks to fix some problems or to add new features that I want. So from your side, like how are the techniques? What are the things that you can do just to change this mindset that okay, you can come here to my project and you can contribute, you can fix this issue that you want me to fix, or you want to add like new features. So how do we change this mindset of the industry that the open source is more like for everyone. Everyone can go there and do it instead of just using the project as it is. It's for everyone.
It's a good question.
If you figure it out, tell me. I'd say the majority of people that come into my project just want to use it, and very few actually want to give back. For myself, I've had to learn how to say no, because a lot of people that do come in and want to do things want to take the project in a way that I don't want it to go. And so I generally have my contributing guide, and I have sort of what the project's about, and I'm very clear what it is and what it isn't. And sort of setting those boundaries up front has been helpful to not get carried away, but actually getting people involved is a hard thing that I haven't really solved, if I'm being honest.
I guess we've been workshopping this with a few maintainers, and to your point, that where you define the boundaries of your project is very, very important. If we look at the foundation of open source, the software has been and is free as is. As feature requests come in and as PRs come in, this is where a maintainer needs to decide, is this a bug, is this a feature, or is this something that I'm going to spend more time on? And this is when the maintainer not only has to build that extra feature that's being raised, but they also have to maintain it. So you're already doing this work for free. It's great that you're getting the downloads, but there's also the maintenance burden that comes with it. And that's where maintainers need to make a conscious decision. That's where I think the industry as a whole, and this is where we play at Thanks Dev, is to make companies recognize that the software is free as is. But if your engineers are raising these issues, it's great that you're contributing to bugs and improving the code quality. But as you start raising feature requests, there is extra burden on the maintainer. And that's why it's important to make sure that these projects in the different languages and ecosystems remain sustainable. So part of it is, I think it's an industry education process that needs to go through to say, yes, if you look in the 1980s when you shipped code, you didn't have GitHub, and there wasn't that many change requests coming in. But today's maintainers are getting a lot of new change requests, feature requests, and the system is picking up pace, which means that there's extra burden on the maintainer, and this is something that needs more awareness within the ecosystem.
Yeah, and when you say free, it's make it clear it's not as free as in free beer or free food. It's free as in freedom, right? You have the freedom to look at the code, change it, manipulate, but not to make me work for free for you, right? So we don't do that, right? And it's interesting that going back to the question of maintainers, right? I maintained JS cookie because it was fun. Reading the RFC 6265 with all the specification on which characters can be decoded or not, and testing every single browser using browser stack, and that's nice 6. Oh my god, it works nice 6. And I don't know if it works now because browser stack has dropped support like 3 years ago. Browser stack, which is the testing thing. So now not support anymore, but I was supporting 6 for a long time, and it was fun to build something like that, right? I mean, something that works is like, I mean, you feel accomplished, right? And I think that's what the incentives for the people that do this after the thing, has been downloaded from many, billions of times and things like that. So one of the things that also helps is that as it becomes more prominent, people come with ideas, right? And one of the ideas of the JavaScript cookie, which is the with converter API that returns another instance of the cookie, but then with a different converter for read and writing cookie, in which you can override that with some sort of specific protocol that goes against the spec. That idea came from an issue, from a comment, from someone randomly just coming in and said, hey, maybe we can do it like this, just a snippet. And I was like, oh wow, that's so crazy. It's so cool. And then I use that. I build a cookie that, I mention the person and give credit. And I would never have thought about that, and what Leno says, when enough eyeballs or bugs are shallow, but with enough eyeballs, our features are so easy, right? It's crazy, and that's where what open source works, and why I would encourage even corporations to open source things that are not their core IP, right? Because that would allow a lot of people to create this common good of tooling. And that's exactly what happens, right? With a lot of the for-profit organizations out there that are built on open source, like Linux and Kubernetes and React, to name a few that have the back of a corporation. So there's business there. There is also personal interests and hobbyists. Absolutely.
Yeah, so speaking about hobby, how do we change this behavior? Like, I like open source. I do that like as a hobby, but I want to do that as part of my main work. So I want to pay my bills doing open source. Is that possible?
That's a good question.
So yeah, that's a question here. How viable is the idea of working full time on open source projects?
I think that if I look at the industry, I'm optimistic. And we see the trend that more and more maintainers are getting sustainable incomes. There's more companies that are supporting payments. That things like GitHub sponsors has made it significantly easier. But I guess the challenge is that you can't see one company going out and setting up 1,000 GitHub sponsorships because they depend on 1,000 different projects and repositories. So this is where platforms like ThanksDev play an important role, because all of a sudden a company can analyze their dependency tree and automate that donation process to all the open source maintainers that they depend on. So that's one of the critical aspects. I guess the other critical aspect, and for us doing a lot of interviews with open source maintainers, is does the maintainer actually want that money, right? Because if you work full time, there's a level of accountability, right? You're going in every day, you're checking in, and you're doing certain stuff. Now, for the value that you're creating for the company, you're getting a salary. In the open source world, there are a lot of projects that have created significant value, but the maintainer does not want to do customer service, relationship management. They just want to have the code and be at arm's length away. If you want to get that money coming in from the companies, you also need to start working on those relationships. So for us at ThanksDev, it's very important that we also show, like for example, Alec can log in and he can see who are all the companies that depend on his project and his packages. And we've also worked with him to connect with other companies, like for example AT&T, to know that AT&T depend on his project, and getting AT&T to contribute to the documentation, because if that package is better documented, then the adoption will improve, right? And it will build momentum because it becomes critical to the GoLang and the Go ecosystem. So there is that level of maturity that needs to come through. But I think if I look at the number of downloads across the different ecosystems, it's very clear that it is picking up pace, it is picking up momentum. Hopefully that answered the question. Yeah?
Yeah. I have a potentially interesting take on this, because I've been very, very fortunate in my career that I've often been in positions where I get given time, paid time from my company to work on open source. And because of that, I've never asked for any sponsorship or any financial contributions for the work that I've done in open source. I would feel weird asking for it, and I wouldn't want to accept it.
Exactly.
Largely for what you said, it would feel like then I owe that time back to the people, and I would have to work on the features that they want rather than the ones I want, and all that sort of thing. So I don't necessarily want financial benefits coming my way for it, but I would love to work 100% of my time in open source, and be compensated for that. But I haven't worked out how yet.
And the other thing is that one of the interesting points that you raise is there are companies like cal.com, right? It's actually a for-profit company that's open sourced. So again, there's like VC companies like OSS Capital that fund open source projects that are set up to be for profit. So I guess there is a shift. There's some people that don't want the responsibility or the burden that comes with, hey, you need to fix this issue, you need to fix that issue. But there is this hybrid model coming in with companies like cal.com and a few others that are actually set up for profit, and they are getting other open source maintainers to come and build features and things on top of their platform. So it is. I guess it's ever changing. There is the I don't want the money, but then there is the capitalism coming into the ecosystem too.
So when money comes into place, the incentives of the system change.
Absolutely.
And I've been in recent calls with, I'm not sure if people here are familiar with this, like before the internet there was this thing called FreeNet, and Ian Clark, he created that, and I found him on Reddit, and it was a very interesting conversation about, the incentives of capitalism and why networks that are decentralized and free as in freedom and with common goods and all that, they don't work, and why the internet work. They work because you can have companies behind a walled garden, etc. So it's crazy how if it doesn't fit that, it's very hard to make people incentivized to actually produce good things. So why does a lot of good things come, right? And not just from companies, but from like Linux. We're gonna make an example, but it's not a lot, right? I mean, Linux is one project, right? And there's a lot of other ones that are also built. I think Winamp, it was open source, right? And VLC player, I think, right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of apps like that, right? And what happened? What's going on? What's different, right? I did some research back in the day, a few years ago, and there's two kinds of open source. There's the GitHub open source, which will say, I call it modern open source, where you've got a GitHub, it's centralized, right? GitHub is a centralized system using Git, which is a decentralized source control. Right? It's a matter for another conversation. But yeah, it's centralized, and a lot of stars and watches and things happen there. And there's the classical open source, which is more on the times of the Cathedral and the Bazaar style of open source Linux, where you've got people together collaborating to going against like a giant, like Microsoft, for example, right? Like Mozilla, and get funding to do that, and not getting paid for it. And the mechanics on how it works is different. Like instead of going to GitHub and developing on a centralized organization and all that, you're decentralized. You have to use mailing lists. You use like Git for actual decentralized source control, where you get different nodes with IPs that you connect them, and you can share the code and do pull requests, or request pull as Git puts it, which is different from GitHub pull request. But there's two kind of open source, I would say, the modern and the classical. And the classical tends to work better because it creates a system of collaboration. And on GitHub, it's more centralized, more like GitHub owns everything, and it optimized for having everything there, right? So it's interesting how you can have different incentives on different ways of working, and how the other way, the more decentralized, is harder to get people in because it's a little bit more complicated. It doesn't have the financial incentives of GitHub as a for-profit organization to say, hey, the more people that we have here, the better, so I put more ads and then I'll bring more people, so they have incentives. But the other one doesn't. That's why you don't see many people doing that in the media.
Next question, a little off topic. Did direction and ownership of your project become less personal and more sponsor-directed once an external sponsorship occurred?
I never had external sponsorship, so I can tell. That.
So,
sorry, that was my question. I was just going to ask because I'm in open source. So my assumption was with a lot of open source projects, they start free without sponsorship. So once, I don't know how this sponsorship works, but once a company sponsors, did you guys find that you have less control over your projects, but it sounds like that you were sponsored first and then had the open source.
Yeah, I know from experience of somebody else. Like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with curl. There's a guy called Daniel Stenberg. He's the one of the guys who created RFC 6265, co-authored along with other folks at the time, back in the day. And he built curl, and he started like us, just a normal, small hobby project. But because curl is so, I mean, the interface is simple, but there's a lot of possibilities you can do when interacting with the server through HTTP. And there's a lot of features that curl has. I mean, if you think, you probably use just curl minus H or whatever, but there's a lot of features. It supports so many things. It supports more than huge projects that do HTTP, call. And it's just a command line, right? And he managed to get his employer or a new employer, I'm not entirely sure, to sponsor him to work full time on that open source project. I guess it's because his employer has a stake on it, and they use curl quite a lot, and but I don't know exactly. He would have to be here, but he's not based in Australia to explain that. But yeah, he does have sponsorship, and that hasn't changed the way that curl goes. Still, I haven't heard anything bad about it. But I know that there might have been other projects. If you know any, do you know anything?
Maybe my advice would be, when you establish a project, it's very important to define the license, right? So that defines the structure of the project going forward. Now, there's different open source licenses that you can look at, and it's perfectly fine for you to accept sponsorships. But when you accept these sponsorships, you have to make it quite clear that it remains, the license is not changing just because you're sponsoring it. So if it's a MIT or an Apache, no, software is free as is. If you want to contribute to me, great, I'll keep maintaining it. And that's the way that it is. Now, there are different models and other licenses that you can look at, but the most common being MIT and Apache, so you should be looking.
Yeah, so I've never really accepted external sponsorship on my projects. So when I have been paid by companies and had time to work on open source, it's always been the projects or work that sort of benefits that company that I'm working for. So that'll direct where I put my effort during those hours. Like, for example, I'm currently working at Cash App, and we have open source projects, and I'm often paid to work on those projects. But in all of those cases, it's always at the benefit of the company that's paying me, rather than any external company or external forces.
Thank you. It's just it was only a small amount of characters, so I couldn't really explain that question.
Thanks.
And the situation is different when you're employed and you open source something versus when you've just open sourced it and you're getting sponsorships because you've realized other companies are using it. So they're the two separate scenarios.
Next one, what are your latest open source projects, and is it something you continually work on?
So the last thing I did that I open sourced was last week, where I started to automate the links that I share on Twitter, LinkedIn, that I read, and stuff that I read. Because I mean, I don't just do open source. I do participate in like Reddit and Hacker News, and have some. Everything that I read, I mean, not 20-30% of read I post in those places. So I've created like something that watches my Medium posts, the RSS, and then it sends to my Twitter and LinkedIn, and email too. So it goes to another queue, and then eventually it's supposed to post it to Reddit and Hacker News. That's the thing that I open source it, the last thing in open source. And I haven't open sourced something, I guess, for many years. I think the only was Jess Cook, and I got ownership of Flatten Array, which was one of the projects of. I'm not sure if you're familiar with LeftPad. There was that thing that happened. Yeah, and one of the projects from the guy was Flatten Array, and I got ownership of that project, and I just rebuilt it, stress-driven again, and released a major bump. But again, everybody has taken off the depends anyway. It doesn't have a lot of downloads. And the other one, the notification one, I built it for myself, and I'm not sure if people will use it because not everyone has a blog or Medium or RSS and has to publish to their own LinkedIn and Twitter. I mean, if they do, they use like something like Buffer or Zapier or whatever. And yeah, but I have it there. If you want, just go there, fork, and change the parameters, and you're done. And it runs like GitHub Actions in a database. So.
Yeah, the latest thing, a lot of the more recent things that I've done in public, I won't say necessarily open source, but public GitHub repos, have been sort of reproduction cases for bugs for other things. So I'll often have open projects there that I create to demonstrate something that's going wrong for someone else. React Hooks Testing Library is the last sort of real project that I've open sourced, and I still work on it 3.5, 4 years later. I'm still doing it.
One of the projects that we're working on is called the Burden Bot, and we're open sourcing that. That just allows maintainers to set up a GitHub bot that tells them if it's a feature request coming through, if it's a bug, and who is coming from. Is the person raising the issue coming from an organization or from a part of an organization? That just helps the maintainer get a better understanding of who's using their project and what value they're creating for the ecosystem. If anyone wants to come and help, you're more than welcome. Just reach out to us. We'll get you the help on the project.
What is the hardest part of maintaining your open source project, and how have you dealt with it?
For me, it's conciliating job, income, and the effort that I put into it. Because I tend to, like the JavaScript cookie, there was some point that there was no feature, and I started code golfing it, and every single byte that I could spare, gzipped, I would make a commit and optimize for it. Just because there was nothing else to do, and I didn't have anything else at that time. Now today I have a lot of stuff going on, so it's very hard to conciliate that and still continue contributing to it. It's good that it's a project that is basically done. You don't really need to do anything else on it. And I think Klaus is doing some building stuff and changing the API slightly here and there. And he's taking on the past few months and years, and I just participate on the issues. But yeah, conciliate, I think, income and everything like that. It's tough. And of course, if I had that as a full-time job, probably I would be doing it as a full-time. But again, in the industry, I can definitely get paid more by doing for-profit stuff. So that's the hardest part, I would say.
Yeah.
The hardest part for me has always been knowing when to stop a project. I've had many over the years that I've worked on, and they all sort of, I work on them for a bit, either they work out or they don't, and then at some point they're done, and I need to move on to other things. And knowing when that point is, I tend to hang around too long, and not hand over the reins to someone else, or archive and deprecate everything soon enough.
I guess for me, talking and having done a lot of interviews with open source maintainers, one of the things, it's kind of, if a project is successful, the maintainer will burn out, right? Or they do reach a point where they're just like, no, had enough. Do I hand it over to somebody else, or do I get more people to work on the project? And I guess the reason that happens is most people set up the project under their own name, right? Initially, you start out and you think, oh yeah, I'm just going to put it under my name, and it gets popular, and my name's getting popular. But then at some point, my name is also has 1,500 issues against it, right? And is that a representation of my quality or my work? It could be a blessing, or it could be a disaster. And that's where maintainers burn out. So I guess the thing that happens is, as you become more and more successful, it's about, is this something you want to do long term, or is this something that you want to hand over to someone, and having a very good handover plan? Who are the community that are also passionate about what you're working on? I was mentioning it before, it's very strange for me that this is something that people start doing as a hobby, and they actually burn out doing it as a hobby. Like you don't hear a guitarist saying that they got burnt out, or a drummer saying they got burnt out playing the drums. It's rare, but it's very common for me to talk to open source maintainers that have been working on weekends maintaining packages, and they just can't keep up. So it's very important, like you have a community, it's very important that you engage with that community, try and get other people on board. But also, if you do feel like you're burning out, reach out to us, right? Thanks.dev, we're here to help, and we're here to work with the maintainers to understand where these issues are, who are the companies that are using them, and let's try and get some funds in, or let's try and get some support, whether it's going through our network to talk to other maintainers or other ecosystems, getting people in to help.
Yeah, so things change over time. Like when I started doing open source, it was almost 10 years ago now, and life was very different for me back then. I was a younger man, I had very few responsibilities. Now I have family and less time, and it's difficult to keep up with it all. I mean, I've definitely gone through periods where I just open up my issue list and I stare at it and I can't even start working on it because it's just overwhelming. So yeah, it definitely happens.
Speaking of finance, something interesting that happened. I thought, hey, JavaScript books get a lot of visibility, and hey, I don't know, create a way for people to donate. Maybe not everyone has a credit card. Maybe I use crypto like Bitcoin or something, and then people can donate, and then I can use that and distribute along with other people, right? Maybe I can distribute in things like that or something, and use that like a funnel to help other people because they don't need that money, right? So and then I posted on a few places and all that. And it was an interesting reaction. People thought I was trying to scam. Left pad had just happened, and like, hey, left pad V2 or something. And I was like, okay. And then I just dumped it, and it shows even an attempt to get someone that's not even for me. I just want to help, and people think that we want to scam them, and it's crazy. People use, and yeah, it's just weird. And it happens on modern open source. It's not so much when the Linux time, when people would get together on mailing lists and do something as a hobby, and because the system is distributed, everyone would do their own part and agnostic of everybody else. And whoever didn't do, then the rest of people would do it. And if everybody did it, they wouldn't step in each other's shoes, right? And because of the system, how pull requests work, it will pull the changes that are relevant to your distribution, not necessarily the changes in a centralized place, right? So it's crazy how the incentives of distributed and centralized kind of change when you have that. And yeah, it's a whole other conversation about how the classic open source works. Really, really interesting.
So our last question before the break: thoughts on the maintainer of Faker.js deleting their library because they are not being compensated enough? How to prevent similar things from happening? Guys, can you explain a little bit what happened and why that happened?
Yeah, so basically, just like left and pad, right? A maintainer wasn't being paid, and I think it was depressed or something like that, and he removed the dependency from I think npm. Is that correct? Yeah,
Yes.
npm. Just like left pad, it happened a few years after that, and it broke a lot of builds. So how to prevent that happen? Well, do we want to prevent that happen? He's not being paid. Do we blame him? And the license, I think it was MIT, which means that the software is built as is, which means that all the people could fork it, and they did, and then they replaced him, which, fair enough, they did, right? And it was whenever you include a software in your for-profit company, and someone removes the project, it's on you. It's not on them, right? You have added it, right? You might have millions of downloads, sure. It will break a lot of builds, sure. Then maybe it's not a way to blame the person who did that, but also to blame the system, both from a social perspective and from a technical perspective. Like you have a system of centralized registries that you remove something, there's no fallback, and you've got a social aspect of, Jesus, those folks are not being paid for, right? So something's wrong there. So the more it happens, it actually creates some sense on people, right? Where, look, there is this thing called open source, and people are not being paid to do that, and you know it basically sustains the whole infrastructure of every single company, right? And so what? What should we do? You know, I think we should do something. And the more it happens, I think the more that becomes clear, right? And I mean, it's not good when you want to do a hot fix and the build's not working. But yeah, anyway, it's tough, right?
Yeah, it's hard for me to comment on those sort of situations because I've never put anything out there with the intention of getting paid. So it's hard for me to say, you know, you've done this thing because you weren't getting paid and now you've sort of messed everyone else up. It feels like a dick move, really. But I think like there's also my personal feeling is that I think all of the like artifact registries like npm, Maven, etc. There should be an element of it where once artifacts are published, they should not be able to be removed. They should be able to be flagged as like deprecated or security issues or whatever.
They changed that after Leftpad, and now you cannot remove a version. I think after certain downloads or something, but you can always bump it up. And yeah, there's something that they did to protect that. And,
yeah, so if the safeties are in place, then I think we're in a better position for those sort of things in the future. But yeah, I don't think like you can't expect to be paid if you're going into open source. I think that's a difficult starting position to go with.
Sorry, I'll have to go a little bit because I got a disagreement. So basically, what happens to those people is that they never started with that intention, right? They left bad or fake just never started with that intention. That happened, right? And there's a case where someone was in Ukraine and the war started and he didn't have anything to eat or food, couldn't pay anything and nobody was giving a shit, right? And he had this open source project work for free. It's like you don't predict that war would happen, and then you would need stuff and then nobody's there for you, right? And it's pretty disappointing, right? Sometimes people are, if you're relevant enough, and maybe something like curl, people will pay attention. But maybe something that just has a couple thousand, 100,000 downloads, and then you dedicate your life to it, and then eventually something happens that you need help and you can't get it. It's very frustrating, right? And I think that's where they're coming from, right? They're not coming from, I want to come here so I can screw everyone. No, things happen after. And that's a risk for business, for society, and even for open source, right? So I think that's my take on that. Yeah, that's fair.
Maybe if I can turn it back to everyone, how many people know about Faker.js, the internet? So a few people, yeah. How many people know about Dennis? Who's Dennis? He's the person, right? Behind every project, there's an individual, and that's what's important, right? There's individuals that have spent 14 years working on these projects, right? You can't all of a sudden dismiss the value that they created. Because you can come in and say, I think the other one is Color.js. There's Faker.js, there's Color.js. The individuals in Russia, right? I don't care about his history. I don't care about the war. They're still using his code, right? If you really, really have moral ethics, remove the code from your package, right? Companies are still using the value that this individual created 14 years working on the project, right? There's individuals that are working, they're spending time, they put their life in this, right? You don't realize how much it means for that individual seeing those downloads. And what all of a sudden companies expect like him to walk away, and people have this opinion, you contributed, you gave it for free, you shouldn't expect payments. That's not right, right? If you're gonna, and we clearly see it, if you look at GitHub, people are raising feature requests. And this individual, I don't care where they are on the planet, is actually working on those feature requests. The least the company could do is have the decency to pay. That's all that we're saying, right? Long gone, there was a time that you publish a code and it didn't change in 10 years. You just put it out there, code it. These days, everybody's running scripts, everybody's running updates, and there's new versions of stuff. And if you're a maintainer, there's an expectation that you'll keep maintaining this stuff, right? Why? Because Netflix depends on Core.js.
And it's interesting that what you're talking there is more of a kind of maintainer that doesn't represent the two of us here. Because like mostly not me, because the project is done basically. There's not much feature to develop, just hobby and code golfing and stuff like that. And those ones that have those packages, there are downloads, downloaded hundreds of thousands of times and a week, and they're being used by, as I said, Netflix, and Amazon, etc. And those are the ones that needs to keep maintaining it because things change. The class of open source is one that needs constant maintenance. That would be the maintenance that a company will have to pay for, and that person is doing just because of course, I started this. I'm doing it as a hobby, and it's fun until it's not, right? So, and there's that. XKCD, of the whole infrastructure of the internet, and then there's a small rock here saying, a developer in Nebraska that built this code in 2023. To remove that, everything falls apart. That's the whole internet infrastructure.
And the case with Faker.js, it was actually, sorry, my bad, it was Marek, right? And he actually reached out to companies to try and get funding, right? He was genuinely trying to maintain that package. And for him, you could argue the point till the cows come home that he did the right thing or he did the wrong thing. But he was trying to make ends meet, right? And it reached the point where he actually burnt out. Now, you could argue the point that he created awareness about the problem that existed in the ecosystem, or you could come in and say that, oh no, it's like he did the wrong thing. But again, like if I look at Core.js and Dennis being out of Russia, that was a whole thing that happened. Now, for a fact, these things happen. Now, we know that these individuals are providing critical infrastructure. And to the point that it's actually used by the UK government. When we analyse their code base, the UK government depends on these individuals. At the same time, we also know that there's Chinese actors trying to buy those code bases. Right? So you can come in and say that, this is critical infrastructure, and then we have cases that Marek was actually one of the people that created awareness about the issue.
That's one of the reasons why the classical open source, because it's distributed, you cannot have one single actor. You are pulling from a distribution from a trusted person. Yeah. Now, if you're pulling from NPM or GitHub and you get someone's account, it's centralized, right? So any state actor can go there and hack the government, right?
This is the thing where I think we need to get money into the ecosystem. And I think there's legislation coming in by the US and by the EU to say that this is critical infrastructure. And we welcome that, right? Because the industry is changing at a rapid pace, right? 20 years ago, you didn't have GitHub. You didn't have this level of collaboration. But as the speed of collaboration increases, also the risks increase. And that's what we have to work with.
The risk for everyone.
Just to play a bit of a counterpoint to that a little bit, you're saying that, like, he's been working on it for 14 years, whatever. And it's critical, and Netflix is using it, so he has to maintain it. But I do question a little bit
in his work.
Yeah, I do question a little bit though. Like, yes, Netflix is using it, but can they expect maintenance if they're not paying for it? If they're not putting the support in, they actually don't deserve anything that he's not willing to do. Anyway, and if his situation changes and he's no longer able to do that, then it's a bit like pulling the rug out from under it. You've put something out there in the world for free. They've been using it for free, and then you say, no, you can't have it now, you have to pay me. It's a difficult situation for both sides.
Instagram did that, right? You go to Instagram, it was a lot of pictures you could access, and then 5 to 7 years later, logins. Well, alright.
It's perfectly normal for enterprises to do it.
Why is it
right?
not normal for open source?
Yeah, so many times enterprises, you log into a website and it says you have new terms and conditions.
Yeah.
So what would have prevented him from not publishing any new versions without a new license that says you must pay? It's no longer free.
Yeah.
You can use the old versions, sure, but any new features, you must
Instagram
pay
can do
for.
the same. You can have the pictures and then just have a login in the corner.
But see, the thing is, company, like, the point that you're raising is absolutely valid, right? And there are people that go down the route of changing licenses. There are people that go to the freemium model, right, where these things are free. If you want to go for the premium route, you have to pay, and that's a different license. I guess there's no right or wrong, right? Like the flexibility with open source is that you can change and you're not tied into something. But I guess fundamentally, right, the person had good intentions. Do they need to pay for these good intentions for the rest of their life? Right? Like the person started this with good intentions. They didn't start with malicious intent, right? And at a certain point, you've got to ask yourself, like, are we doing the right thing by the industry? Because if the most common thing with open source is burnout, why would anybody sign up for more burnout? Right? We want to promote open source. And to promote open source, you need to put money in. Right? So that's...
I agree with that.
Yeah, that's all that we're saying. Yeah.
Cool, awesome. Thanks, guys, for the conversation. Thanks for the questions. So we're gonna be doing a break right now. We're gonna be back in 10 minutes with a different format. Cool. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Bathroom notice in case anyone missed that information. Men's bathrooms are just out the door and that way. Ladies' bathrooms are out the door and this way. If you get lost, come find me and I'll direct you to the bathroom. Yeah, I'll see you guys again in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
These conversations are right and wrong, and it's very nuanced. Every situation is different.
Yeah.
Didn't answer my question.
So basically the same idea that was being here as
Everyone sits, another one comes up. If nobody comes up, then it's your task to go and grab another way to the oldest person. So they take it slowly. But in the audience, it has to be silent, and you have to make that clear so people can make the questions. You have to go fast. All the setup is perfect.
Great, okay. So it's going to blow your numbers a little bit.
I like that one. You cut him blood, let him drink fucking out. Yeah, that's for people who real and lithium. You get the Oh, you actually
The break we are doing like which is like I would be there just making the questions. So instead of doing slide,
Oh, goodbye, Barry.
Probably it's been
when you create some people they left. That's why like it's my first time being this side. It's a good environment.
Everyone, let's go back, break it over. Let's fun time. Let's start part two. Maybe start with the panelists and then we go.
yeah, so the panelists are going to ask a question and I leave. And then you guys can go back to the audience.
Okay, and then other people speak. So in the beginning we stay here, you ask the question, and you stay out here.
Yeah, the audience and then
No worries. Okay. So where's Armin? Armin? Where's mine?
Actually amazing. Yeah.
I gotta be careful. We can sit here.
Whatever it is.
Michael?
On a reverse.
So we stay here, and they ask the question, but then you go to the audience and somebody else. Just to show that.
yeah, it's recording.
I did the same. Shake it right now. You come back next week and be like,
Cool. So for this second part of the event, we're gonna do a little bit different, the format. We're gonna do a fishbowl session, which is basically, instead of using Slido to ask questions or just add like your thoughts to the conversation, you just come here and do that. And the idea here is we're gonna have one empty chair. So if someone from the audience goes to this chair, one of the folks that are already here, they need to leave, go to the audience, and we always keep one chair empty. Okay.
Is it gonna be your chair?
Yes, so my chair. I'm gonna be asking the first question, then I'm gonna leave, and then if you want to keep the conversation, ask questions, just come here. As you come, one of these guys are gonna be back to the audience and go in.
And the conversation just happens here.
Yes, and the conversation happens only here. But if you want to ask questions there, it's fine. But let's try to follow the flow. Cool. So let me see here. I like your shirt, Michael.
Great t-shirt.
Red bubble, get on it.
So where do you recommend hosting projects? Would you recommend GitHub given the Copilot lawsuit?
So,
You guys.
so maybe we can now go there, and the audience can now come over and can stay, or maybe one stays, and then
I think you guys can stay and I leave.
direct.
Yeah.
And then
I
someone
leave
comes in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then
All right.
let's move. Yeah.
Cool.
Start with you.
All right. So let's. So where to host the project? Well, if you're keen to do classic open source, then do it on Git. Have your friends using DNS to map to their IP, and then add them as remote into the the Git target, and start pulling code from them and merge into your main tree. Now, if you have no idea what I was talking about,
Yeah, don't do that, it's too hard.
if you have no idea what I was talking about, then GitHub, GitLab, I don't think it really matters much where you host it. But if you want to make it more visible, I would say GitHub, because they do a very good job in SEO, as you can see. And definitely put the name of your project, one that people search, and then eventually you will get a lot of exposure there. Yeah. And anyone can come here and add more to the conversation, just let you know.
Does anybody have any ideas on alternatives to GitHub and GitLab? They're the popular ones.
Yeah, what's the big bucket one?
Oh yeah, the Atlassian one. Yeah. Is anybody from Atlassian here? Bucket.
just not.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just put it in GitHub myself. I'm curious, what's the Copilot lawsuit? What's happening? I haven't heard of that one.
Well, my questions, I'll give you some.
See,
Just come on.
take a
Always one needs to be
Sorry.
It's all right.
I'm drunk, guys.
There has to be one empty seat.
No, but that's with the opposite, is it not?
No. It has to be one.
Ah,
You have like one empty seat.
I want your inside, not.
So
Go for it.
Alright, I'll play. Greetings.
Now you're part of the panel.
Yeah. So tell me about this lawsuit.
Right, so I'm sure all you open source people love Microsoft, although they have become a bit better over the years, if we're honest. The problem is that with Copilot and all this AI stuff that's around, it's supposed to help you write code really quickly and efficiently and correctly, but it's basically trained on...
Closer.
Sorry.
And then you can...
There we go. It trained on open source code. So the recommendations are code that's potentially and probably licensed as open source and free and not really something you should be giving proprietary companies without attribution at least. So they're being sued, basically, them and GitHub. So the question is, for me, actually I'm starting a little project, and I started with GitHub for precisely the point that was made about visibility, trying to get more people to know that it exists, that I can get contribution. But I don't like the idea of code that I want to be free to be just simply given away without attribution. So I'm in two minds whether I continue that route or if I find an alternative, basically.
For my project, I prefer things like Copilot and those sort of things to be trained on the code and more specifically the documentation within the repo, because as a library that people consume, I'd like them to get accurate information about how to use it. So if it's trained on my code and trained on my documentation, then it's more likely to be correct for my consumers. But I can definitely see the other side of the argument that you wouldn't want that. I don't know. If it's open, then they can read it. It's going to be a tough one to prevent, I think, in a meaningful way.
I guess so. We're working with SourceGraph and Kodi, and they are supporting open source. So maybe that's an option that you could look at. If you guys want beta access to Kodi, when you sign up to Thanks Dev, we send you a link that you can get beta access to that. That is an alternative and an option as well. And they've been really, really proactive with supporting open source. That was a paid sponsor there.
So Kodi is an alternative
to Copilot.
Oh, to Copilot.
Yeah.
But for actually hosting your repo?
You can put some stuff in there, but it just depends on the ecosystem. Yeah. But they do support it.
So on that note, who is Kodi or what is Kodi?
So, Ali, do you want to explain that one?
So it's
sucked in.
I better go on this.
So Kodi is a Q&A system against your code base. So as you're in VS Code and you're typing something or you've got functions in there, you can ask questions against what's the current active file in your VS Code, and it will answer according to ChatGPT and the context that it sees. So it's a slight alternative to Copilot, where Copilot just gives you code snippets. Kodi gives you suggestions and talks to you about what you're trying to do.
Okay. And part of that is being able to host your code within that platform.
Yeah.
All right. So can I just add a second question, which was in the chat too, which kind of goes to this, and it can go to, I suppose it's just us three up here, but anyway, you guys can jump into.
Well, I got a question, so I can jump in and ask you one first.
Come on down.
Yeah, sure.
Come on down.
One go up, I guess.
Okay.
You could stay. Alec, it's your turn.
Alright, so I'll check this out, then I'm going to bounce. Okay, do I need this? Is this being recorded for that guys online who need to hear us?
No, it's just that I think in the back
can
might be.
hear it.
If you put it very closer to the mouth, then it becomes very hard.
Cool. I'm gonna speak loudly. Can you guys hear me?
All right.
No, don't do that. Okay, cool. So the second part of the question was actually kind of going to, I think, your point where, Michael's point where he doesn't really care about the IP because it's not something that it matters to him. But there are projects where the IP itself can matter. Not because you want to make profit from it necessarily, but more just like in my case, I want it to be continually free to use. I don't want anybody to be like, cool, I'm going to add something to it and then charge a fee for it because of the nature of the project. So I would want to protect the IP through a license probably. That sort of requires that code to be shared back into the project. And you can then charge to distribute it if you want, whatever you've changed, that's fine. But the code itself, that application itself, should be preserved in that sense. So I would love to know what people think about that and how to handle that. Have you thoughts?
Can you rephrase that particular question?
Oh, there you go. No, I'm out of here.
You mentioned the GNU license, right? I guess, you know.
GNU license.
GNU. No, what is it? So the GNU license, right? That's probably what you meant. And yeah, I personally don't use that in my projects because, I mean, it's very hard to predict what people are going to use it for. And I think that all those licenses can be enforceable on companies, like for-profit companies that have lawyers. Most people won't really care about it. It would be very hard for me to detect that anyway. So the only thing I might be doing is restricting the usage of the software and not really making something enforceable. And it's not like I'm going to sue someone. I don't have the, the money to do that. So that'll be my position on it.
So continue on from that. An important topic here is been licensing in general and open source. It's kind of assumed that if you put a license, say it's MIT, it says bloody MIT, you can look it up and see what it's supposed to be used for. So in the lawsuit, or if somebody else is using your code, for example, shouldn't the license reflect your feelings and how it's supposed to be used? So MIT is pretty much free for all, if I remember correctly. So if somebody else goes and uses your code, you don't care, right?
Yeah, so MIT is the most liberal, use without limitations that license there is. And yeah, it means that I don't really care. Like without a license, there are some implicit contract between the person who uses it, the person who provides whatever code as you're providing a product, even if it costs zero. Now with a license, at least you cover your bases there. But there are some jurisdictions in the US, and I'm not sure if people will be aware of this, that even if you have an MIT license, right? If you are producing a product that includes software, regardless of the price, in this case, if it's free, the price is zero. There's still a price, but the price is zero. Then you are liable for issues that code can cause, even with MIT license. Just that nobody has tested that in court yet, so there's no precedent.
So, to clarify, if anyone's a lawyer here, this is a good time to chime in. Okay, wrong audience. Let's all talk shit and lawyers can figure it out. No, but say the jurisdiction's Australia, if I want to open source something, and I have, it's literally just one change in an Arduino library, so I can bloody use it. I have not put any license on. I don't care if you use this library and it blows up. See you in court. And then what are you going to say? If, say, you come to this Australian court, the judge is going to be in front of me and I'll self-represent. I'll tell him, hey, I just put 3 lines of code, mate. This guy went and blew something up. Is it my fault or his fault?
Well,
No, I'm not asking for a legal opinion. I'm asking for a dev opinion. Yeah. How would you feel?
See, the dev opinion is when someone publishes something, it's with good intentions.
Yeah.
Right? That's the foundations that you start from.
Of course.
Right? Now, it's kind of like saying someone built, and you can look at parallel industries, right? Someone builds an automobile. Most of the population will use it to get from A to B. There's always one idiot that ruins it, right? And they'll find a new way to use it with malicious intent, right? Are they going to go and sue the Ford Motor Company, right? And that's where there is the logic, right? So you can always look at, what's the edge case or what's the edge scenario? You're always going to have bad actors, and you hope that the legal system takes care of that, right? When people publish something, it's with good intentions, right? As long as, most of the time, there's always exceptions to the norm. I guess MIT accelerates that because it accelerates creativity, right? Because you might write 3 lines of code, and then the next person turns that to 6 lines of code, and then the next person makes a paragraph of code, and then all of a sudden you have a beautiful piece of music, right, or a beautiful piece of code. So we want to promote that,
Yeah.
right? And the MIT does promote that. It does give it a level of flexibility. Now, that's not to say it's the only license or the only open source option. There are other options out there. Companies can choose, and big companies will have an open source program office where they say, these are the licenses that we are comfortable with, and these are the packages we are comfortable with. And different companies that we deal with will have different requirements, right? Some of them say, I don't want to work with individual maintainers. I'd rather work with projects that have multiple people contributing, right? Or some of them will say, I don't want to look at GNU, I only want to do MIT and Apache. But that's up to the open source program office to decide what projects they take on and bring into their ecosystem and what they rebuild.
So in that case, what Microsoft has done with that GitHub Copilot thing, they've just taken, from my understanding, you know that, right?
To a degree, yeah.
So basically, they've just grabbed all of GitHub's code and gone, doesn't matter what the license is in, we're going to train our AI on this. Is that right?
So the thing is, I think people are jumping on this today because this is the news that's happening today. But you could argue the point that Google did the same thing by scanning Wikipedia. Right? Wikipedia was plagiarized by Google, and the content was shown on Google page search results.
It gets a link to it though.
Some credit.
Little boxes. They snip it, Wikipedia, right? And they show them on the Google search result.
But it's taking traffic away from Wikipedia. And you could argue the point, it's taking donations away from Wikipedia. Because on Wikipedia, at least they could ask for donations. Right?
So, as someone who's in marketing and SEO, that's a really interesting point. Because Google's all about consolidating the information, grabbing it together, and then present it to the customer as their own.
It's sugarcoating, don't be evil.
It's exactly. Sugarcoating, they took it out of their motto. It's easier than... They couldn't even be bothered to drop the don't. But the thing is that at its fundamental, Google is a search engine, though. Still, at least we click here, we search something, we click and we see Wikipedia. With GitHub Copilot, do we really want to see an essay underneath the suggestion saying, hey, this is the code from here, this is where it was, and then by the time you read this essay, it's like, oh, I could have just pressed tab. I think that's the challenge that they have.
Oh, it's a tough one because it is a new industry and things are evolving and changing as they go.
I like to give this thanks.dev.
Anybody else want to come up?
Yeah, we need two people.
Wait.
No, you can stay. You can stay. Just as someone goes there, then you can go up.
Yeah.
I thought I could exit.
Is Copilot and the AI systems a paid service?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so like, it's morally bad to take a license that says not to use my code for a paid service and use it for a paid service, right?
It's true.
But you said you won't enforce people stealing your code because it's like really hard and requires a lawsuit and like that kind of thing. So how do we convince people in the legal process that probably don't know how to use a computer that this is good or bad, or like, how do you convert any of these really complex topics into understandable things for the average person?
Can I ask you this then? I feel like it's about the licensing. We need to teach open source developers to say, hey, it should be used in this particular way. This is the code I've made. I guess you wanted to make it simple. So unfortunately, there's no way of licensing, hey, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want. Technically, it's a contract in most jurisdictions, but it gets really messy, like beyond the scope of any lawyers here. A lawyer, we need a lawyer to have a proper discussion. But I think if most developers and people like you go, hey, this is the license we should have, this is what it means. And if we can all collaborate on that, like, no one seems, like I did GA recently, no one seems to know what a license is. Maybe there's some education that needs to go there. And I know same with a lot of unis.
I guess the thing is, lawyers understand black and white. There's no grey, right? So it's either in the contract or not in the contract. If you look at the MIT contract, it's 3 paragraphs, which leaves a lot of room for imagination, right? And in the court of law, it doesn't stand. In the open source community, and this is a challenge that we have when we go to companies and say donate to open source, they're like, what value do I get? Is there a statement of work of what I can see for my donation to open source or for my sponsorship to open source? It's very hard for us to demonstrate value against 3 paragraphs. But what companies don't understand, and this is our job as a community to educate, is open source actually runs beautifully on a set of social norms. And the point that you raised is, as this technology is developed and as it goes to market, what is the community going to say about the social norm? Are we going to say, Microsoft, it's okay, take our code and sell it back to us? Or are we as a community going to stand up and say, this is unacceptable? Did we as a community say, Google, it's fine, take Wikipedia and I've got one less click and I'm happy to pay for sponsored ads? Or did we as a community step up and say, no, Google, you're actually plagiarizing? This is the same conversation happening, and it will play in the court, which is the right place to play. But I guess the community also needs to step up and speak up, right? And the fact that we're talking about it is a good thing because it's creating awareness, and we're thinking, okay, maybe I'll use GitLab instead of GitHub, right? Because GitLab doesn't have this baggage. But
And
that's
then
on
GitLab
us.
became paid. So can we have a plug for your one again? What's it called?
The Cody with SourceGraph.
Cody.
Yeah.
So is that going to protect developers and the way they want their code to be used? Like, will it help them automatically if they want to monetize it? Can your platform do that?
Well, SourceGraph as a platform, again, I think you'd have to talk to the SourceGraph team, but they are more open source. Like, as a platform, they are an open source platform. And they support the standard licenses like MIT and so forth. But yeah, just check it out, reach out to the team. They do have a Slack channel as well. They're very responsive.
So what license should I choose to make sure that ChatGPT and things like this are not stealing it?
That's a Sam Altman question.
You don't put a license, you just charge for the use of their API. Or your API. Right?
Wait,
I just
hold on.
wanted to
Let's be more real. Like, if you don't want ChatGPT or whoever, Microsoft stealing your code, don't put it on GitHub. If you don't want anyone stealing your code, why are you putting it on the internet? Seriously. When you want to commercialize it, that's when you get a bunch of, like, you work for people. I think everyone here is doing good code or wants to do good code, wants to work someone, so that's a level above them. But as a community, we get to have the challenging questions here.
Is there a license where I can give people access to my code for non-commercial use, but restrict access for commercial use?
Creative Commons again? Oh, unless I misunderstood. So I know you're saying that you say to use for not use for profit?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Creative Commons, right? Share alike.
Do you think that should exist?
Yeah, of course.
That exists?
Creative Commons is an awesome licensing thing. It's got like a for infograph thing. One will be like $, saying don't sell.
Don't sell. Yeah.
It's pretty easy to represent. And in regards to the second thing, you could put it in the code, and then you could give it to your mate on a USB. ChatGPT is going to steal it, or Microsoft, or whatever. Actually, they might, China might, but that's another thing. But there's two things: distribution and licensing, right?
Yeah.
If you can control them both, then you control the code. Or am I wrong?
Yeah, but again, you are controlling on licensing. So you are controlling as much as people
say in another country that doesn't have any relationship with your legal system, respects it, right? So if I'm originally from Brazil, I've been in Australia for I guess 7 years, and I've just been Australian citizen for 2 years. So if I go to Brazil and I use, not I because I'm also citizen, but if I get someone that is using code that I developed here in Australia, and maybe I put a license, say, hey, don't use for commercial, and they're making heaps of money in Brazil, what can I do? I can do nothing other than go to war and try to prevent them from doing that. And I've started this project on Brazil. My other partner, Klaus, is in Germany. And now I'm in Australia developing it. So where do we draw the line? So it's pretty tough when you're talking about globalization, right?
Not only globalization, but each jurisdiction is different. So when I say control the code, I mean cut out the jurisdiction and keep it on your computer. If you really want to control it, air gap.
Yeah, just on that point, I think we've talked a lot about. Let me see here. A lot of this is conversation been around licenses of your code, but I think you have to be a little bit careful if the platform you're putting your code on, as part of their terms and conditions, say we can scan your code and use it for our AI training, then you probably don't. You're not a lawyer. Please, if you are a lawyer, speak up. But you probably don't have a leg to stand on at that point if you've given your code to them and agreed to the terms and conditions. So the only solution you really have is don't give them your code.
And in practice, nobody reads that, right? You just go accept. Right?
I definitely don't read
Whoever read the EULA, what was that? End user license agreement, or you got it in a disk or something, right? EULA.
The worst is when you have to scroll to the bottom to accept. Like, how quickly do you just go through that?
Command down, right?
I'm one of those weirdos who used to read them.
Yeah.
I identified as a weirdo.
Fair.
But then I realized, they all sound the same, and they're all meant to be slightly different to fuck you up. So
I've got a feeling as well they're probably vague on purpose to let them do these things in the future and get away with it.
And I know that because that's how I write my contracts.
Any other question to keep the conversation?
Oh, shit.
I have another question if you want. I can jump off there again.
Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Keep it.
I think the question I have, especially for the people who are existing maintainers, who've got lots of experience with this, is how do you ensure quality when you have a project, and maybe you guys haven't experienced this too much, but when you've got a project that has a lot of contributors, how do you make sure that everyone is meeting the standard that you're outlining in your project? And do you set standards? Or you kind of today I feel like that'll do. How do you ensure that?
Which kind of standards, just to be more specific?
Coding standards, architectural patterns,
I think that there's different way of doing that.
Yeah. So my library has about 90 contributors. Most of them only have a couple of lines each, but some more than others. In general, so in my contributing guide, I set out some my expectations on a lot of things, and then I try and back that up as much as I can with automation. So whether it be linting, tests, trying to think of anything else, but effectively automating everything I can, bots, as many bots as I can get on my project.
So things that you can automate, like code style, linting, etc., then that's possible, right? Because it's static analysis, you can objectively do it and hook it. What about architectural patterns and things like that?
I mean, there's always going to be a pull request before I merge anything. So if there's anything that goes against what I want or against the project in general, it'll come out in the review, hopefully, and then the human error comes in, and sometimes things will slip in, and other times I'll have a bad day and really ping someone for little nitpicky things and all that. But generally, just try and apply sort of the positive code review practices as much as I can and help people get to the point where I'm happy to merge it.
One of the things that I've seen, not just in JS Cookie, but also in jQuery, I didn't contribute significantly to jQuery. I mean, I just contributed to JS Cookie. But there's this idea of I mean, there's a set of guidelines of how the API works, and how you do internally doesn't matter as long as you have a test to cover it. I mean, it's more like following the patterns that are already there and being objective on what you're going to do. Because I know that when you're in business, right, there's a lot of patterns that you use so you can make the components perform and evolve according to the business domain, right? So you do domain modeling, and then you design that in such a way that it abides by the domain concepts, and you model the domain models, etc. And then you need that work there because you want the software to evolve in a way that follows the evolution of the domain. You don't want to use a pattern that goes completely against the feature that you're developing, right? Now, in open source, what is the domain? Well, unless you're building something like Linux, which is the domain's operational system, right? You have patterns there too. If you're doing something like jQuery, JavaScript cookie, or maybe even the testing library, the domain is very concise, so there's not much of a need to model it other than the public API, right? Because it's a very small scope of work, and the domain, besides the domain being very small and small scope, is also in a level of abstraction that is reusable to other contexts, so it is applicable to other domains, right? So the need for that kind of design becomes less and less necessary in that setting, and that's one of the reasons, right, why as an open source dev, I did not learn software design, right? But another thing is, I went to companies when I came to Australia. They're saying, "Hey, you have some experience in open source. Oh, you work with pull requests and code reviews and all that. That's awesome. We try to implement the open source model here." And I'll say, "Well, do you develop open source? No, we have a business, so it doesn't work, right? Because open source works for open source. Now, the design is a very good aspect of it, where you care about some things in business that you don't care in open source. And you care about some things in open source that you don't care in business, right? So the incentives are completely different, and try to mimic them and use one to another. They're changeable. There are more to your tool belt is a way to learn better aspects of programming, like on the core ifs and else's. But software design, domain modeling, it's business. You need to get a mentor that works business, and usually you won't find those people in open source. You will find those people in companies, and you're not going to be in every team. But I'm very fortunate to have found a lot of people that understand how to design software and teach me so much that I would ever have learned in open source. It's good to start, but look, there's a whole world out there, and it's not public because it's not available. Right?
You touched on a point there that I think is really important, is as much as possible, I always focus first on the public API. If someone's introducing something and that's what's going to be consumed, I make damn sure that I get that right with them as we go. And the internals matter far less. I can change them later, and they can evolve. But if you get the API wrong, it's difficult to change later. So focus on that first. One thing I do, and I'm curious what other people think about this approach, is I'll often accept a PR that's not quite there, and then I'll go and I'll change it afterwards. Like I'll merge and then I'll do a very quick commit later that makes it more how I would have implemented it. They got sort of most of it right, but then I just kind of make it more like I would do it. And I've often felt maybe that's a little dirty. And I should have, like, I'm stealing their contribution a little bit. I don't know. How do others feel?
Just a quick, they get the commit still, right?
They get a commit, but then their lines would go away, and the blame wouldn't say their name anymore. At least not as much as it would.
So what I did many times before when contributing is, like, I don't merge the pull requests. I don't use the GitHub features, because, I mean, you cannot do, I don't know if you can do it now, but it couldn't do co-authoring at the time. So what I used to do is I fetched the changes. I went to his or her branch in the fork, which comes as a branch in my GitHub, my Git local, and then I go and I check out that, and then I cherry pick. Sorry, I just cherry pick. I don't check out, but cherry pick the pull request, I cherry pick the commit. I do some changes that I need, and then I commit myself by amending the cherry pick, and then I push. Right? So then it becomes the two names on the commit. There's some slight changes there, When they're so minor that I don't want to do that back and forth, then I would do that. But other than that, I never took the credit out. Of course, it was always a reference to the PR, so people could check if there are any changes in the code, and it would be a co-author with the name and of the person who actually helped on that commit. I'm the committer, and the other person is the author, so you can do that again.
For larger changes, I've also been known to pull down their branch and actually submit a pull request back to their branch that then has a pull request on the main line. Yeah, and that's actually worked pretty well because they can actually see, actually, I like the changes he's made and accept it, and then it comes back into their PR and then I can put it through. But it is a bit more work. But only if it's a really big change that I want to make.
In business, that work because people learn, So if I just pull stuff and then I make a change in commit, people won't learn, right? Because you're the one doing this. Now, if you create a pull request to them and then they see the changes and fix by themselves, so their brain is the one processing the feedback. It's not you that's ignoring the feedback, just processing for them. So it's a way of fostering learning in that sense. I mean, there are better ways. I mean, when it's the code review, the cost of change is already to the roof for business, not so much for open source, because I mean we're not paid to work, so we don't care about efficiency. But for business, yeah, we care about efficiency, so that I would recommend that.
I have another point on that. I'm going to skip the mic as long as everyone can still hear me. I get the point you made about domain modeling, and like you're right, it is generally a business sort of activity. And I've been a professional software engineer for about 18 years now, so where I've seen it most has been definitely in that space. But my particular project does have a need for a domain, and so I'm sort of the grand poobah, the king of this little project for now anyway. And I have a sort of vision around how I see it evolving and growing and setting a strong base so that it can be built on, right? And so what I thought of when you were kind of, pointing out that most open source projects don't really go to that level, and it's true. Immediately Linus Torvalds came to mind, Linux, right? And he was famous for being an arsehole. Like, didn't care about anyone's feelings or opinions. It was his way or the highway. And so I sort of wonder, maybe certain projects need that. You need to have some authority, maybe a nicer, more polite authority, but one that is, setting a standard, a minimum benchmark to work.
So just to make it clear, like Linus didn't do he didn't do domain modeling, but he did in a sense. Because, I was having that discussion on Reddit recently about Solid, right? People say, hey, give me an example of Solid being applied to system design. I see that applied to business, but I don't see how that can be applied to system design. Well, it's a different level of abstraction, but it's still there. Instead of creating a component, you create a comment, and the comment has the imperative, lines, and you build another comment. Each one of those comments are blocks. Each block is cohesive on its own, right? And you share some variable, which is hopefully generic enough, so you don't have to change every single piece of those comments every time you make a change. Unless you make a significant change in the interface, in which way you might just rewrite the module. So it's very similar to those practices, right? Just applied on a different level, because you are on a different level. You're not on a domain application level. You are more in the general technical level, technical domain. So the domain modeling still happens, though it doesn't evolve as much. It evolved in the beginning, but once people realize, okay, you've got kernel code, you've got driver, you've got, and then you start building those interfaces, then it becomes a stable, right? And that's why we don't see people, even on Linux, doing that domain model anymore, because the solutions are already there, right? And they already know how it works. Now, in a new startup, like for example, we're gonna build, say, I don't know, an app to share cars and Uber, right? You don't know how the domain looks like, right? So that domain modeling needs to be a constant process, because you're always learning, relearning. You don't do that in Linux, right? It's already done. So that's where I'm not sure if that's similar to what was your second part of your question again.
It was more just the case of I think pointing out that maybe in certain types of projects you need a certain authority or a certain standard. And
just to before but just to so just to about that authority, right? Linus is what when they consider the bazaar, they documented it, is the benevolent dictator, right? Where it's a dictator, but it's benevolent, that's necessary. That's where I guess we were coming from. There's a name for that, benevolent dictator. And I would say that one thing is being a dictator in a centralized system, right? Where it's top down and everybody has to respect you due to hierarchy. And another thing is being a dictator in a distributed system, where you don't get your dictatorship power by conferral, you get it by merit. Because I can very well go to the Linux kernel on Linux main distribution website and pull from there. I can go Debian and pull from there. I can go to Wagner's and pull from there. Now, whoever you trust, that's where you pull your distribution, right? So having a dictator, it's more like everyone's a dictator. The reason why you have one dictator is just because that person is really good, right? And it's not about being conferred to it, he rose to it, all right? So you get by merit. And so try to implement that in an organization. I think there's a set of, again, we're comparing one system with another one with a different set of incentives, and implementing that kind of dictatorship in an organization that doesn't have the distributed incentives and it's for profit, you wouldn't expect the same outcomes, right? Because the system is different and the incentives are different.
I would say in a project like that where you have concepts and things that you want to protect, make sure it's documented. Put it somewhere so that when you want to make it as discoverable as possible when people do come in to contribute, that they don't go too far down the wrong path before they realise that they're on the wrong path. As you said before, when it gets to the pull request, it's like way too late to have a lot of those conversations. You want to have them early if you can. So yeah, document what your expectations are and what the concepts are and how you want things to be, and refer to that in your issue templates and your pull request templates. Make sure they're all really easily discoverable, and learn how to say no. Like I've had to do that. I've had to learn how to say no, especially because people, to them it's the biggest thing that they've ever wanted for your project to do, and you don't want to do it, and you feel really bad about it, and you want to accommodate them, but sometimes you just have to say no.
I feel like you all need to get together and make another Git repo, like, hey, this is the open source Git repo. This is your contribution thing. You guys got to agree to this.
Want to come in?
Yeah, sure.
Actually,
So, like,
because running out of time, so
They can also always fork it.
Yeah.
If they really want to change, they can fork it.
Oh no, I was just gonna. How long did it take you to get to that stage where you're like, I need that contribution guide, I need this and that? Because if I'm a new developer, I don't know these things. I'm just putting some code on here.
So when you start a new project, GitHub is actually pretty good at saying these are the things you probably have to have a
License.
good, a license, a contributing guide, all those sort of things. So a lot of the structure was there pretty quickly, but it evolves over time. I also tend to be a little bit principled in what I do, so I tend to have my sort of things that I want there and can put it out there. But as the issues start piling up and as contributions start coming in, you very quickly start to put those things in place, because otherwise it's unmaintainable.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we go to the retro, just take our time to get some post-its, and I think the idea is
Supposed to people on JC.
yeah, that's right. We that's right. Keep doing. Can improve. And maybe we can do
No,
better.
Feature of this life. What's in here? Because I've never seen these.
Then we can set a 10 minutes for that, and that's it for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a little bit because the piece of
It's yeah. I was trying to play like the situation. For them, they're trying to do a job. They're trying to achieve goals. And this is the thing. So for them, it's their number one.
Not me. Yeah, someone else.
I have the microphone. I have users of I have a lot of people. None of them are my so it's really taking that step.
Yeah, it was interesting, but
Realizing that you never actually
What about co-pilot? Like some topic. You could have done
yeah, to some extent. And you have to make it clear that like, when you're not going to do
Well, it's not good if anyone listens around.
That's right. So, like I was in a company about this back to this is the goal. This is what I'm trying to achieve. The feature does align to it. Does align to it. But I don't have the time. And say you listen to a feature. I don't have the time. If you would like to sort of like
Yeah. Pretty good design.
So, my projects are I guess but like it's really cool.
You used to work with them. Oh, okay.
I purposely that's an issue. It's not like it's actually the side. You can even change my if you really want to get So we were just walking to and we tackled bigger issues. We generally try and tackle issues that are larger in scope that are difficult for the maintainers to do themselves basically time just try to smash that all this together, take a break up not shut up. I haven't done I'm just on myself. So actually, I found that method because I ran hybrid. They converted my whole repo to TypeScript and maybe
So when you say we go, not that kind. I think you're right. Unless someone's got like replacing something, because the worst thing is when you're sitting there, it's like you're like,
we haven't done it in a while. But yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of people. We started with like,
was there a lot?
and
We got to put the question in step, actually.
what? This? Yeah. I just went to hospital and house for a minute. Right. I just one of those things like stopping in the house for a minute. Running around. I got really borrowed. That was a playing sports or? Nah, Get it recorded here. Especially the ones that presentations. The whole interview. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, exactly. And once it's on interview. Look, you could say crowdsourcing onto the web.
It's good for
If you want to do
when I first went,
that aside, that is a whole different thing. I've had the most success. Like that is very returning. I had to fix that relationship. I raised it to $100.
There's two options: B, open source, and who cares who uses it? It's Copilot license. I don't know it's license. No problem. Well, no problem. Exactly.
Step one for yourself.
Good luck with the rent. That's terrible.
Yeah, like unless it goes viral, it's like you accept it as it is.
I'm keen to go. Okay, so when you open, we meet up and...
Yeah, I've never seen this one.
So vou pausar.